Good morning, Bishops Thompson and Taylor, fellow clergy and parishioners. They asked me to speak to you about my ministry at Bridge House today. I realize that we've been listening to a lot of talks for the last few hours and yesterday afternoon, so I'll respect your time, but there's an awful lot to say. I'm known as Deacon J at Bridge House. Not as catchy as Deacon John, but you got to work with what you got. I had someone ask me yesterday, what is Bridge House and Grace House? Bridge House and Grace House are long-term addiction recovery facilities in the city of New Orleans. The programs run 6 to 8 months. Bridge House houses about 85 men. Grace House has several dozen women, and they live in the program. They get counseling each day. They work, they do chores. It's a nonprofit. They don't pay for this. This is supported by donations, government grants. And so it's one of the very few programs that someone who is desperate, that has no money, that is involved with addiction can get into, whether it's drugs or alcohol. 8.5 years ago, with trembling and fear, I walked into the front doors of Bridge House. And it was appropriate that I was trembling in fear because I was asking God to use me and to make a change in my life. And we all know how much people in church like changes. So I walked in there, and Father Francis King was chaplain there at the time. He was about to move on. But he introduced me to the men at Bridge House and showed me that these guys are just like us. I learned what the 12 steps was all about. I learned that addiction knows no boundaries, no race, no class, no level of education. I meet doctors and lawyers and architects and engineers and chefs and clergy and everyday people whose lives have been destroyed by substance abuse. I didn't understand what caused all this. See, I was brought up in a world, middle-class, white suburb, where the drunk uncle or aunt was just kind of marginalized to the side and made fun of and not really spoken about in family circles. So like the addicts that live in denial about their addiction, we lived in denial about them and what caused it. Over these 8.5 years, I started a movie ministry. So every Monday night from 7 to 10, I've shown movies, hundreds of movies. And we talk about, after the movie, we talk about where the 12 steps and where the spirituality was in the movies. And these guys are amazing. They show me, teach me things all the time. I didn't realize I had addiction in my own family. I had a brother pass away 2 years ago who was still addicted when he passed away. And I have other addictions in my family. As Lance pointed out, 10% of the people in our country are involved in addiction, but there's actually another 50% that it affects. So in our congregations, we have about 60% of the people that have some direct connection to addiction, whether themselves, their family members, their friends. That's a lot of people in our parishes. We live in a time where opinions are valued much more than compassion. Yet our missions as Christians is to be Christ to all. And so in my ministry, these guys taught me what compassion was all about. I watched them support each other and share stories that would just rip your heart out, and realized that had I not had this privileged upbringing in white middle-class America, I might be one of the residents there myself. I didn't quite get the connection between their lack of ability to overcome this addiction. And so in my research, I found that they're predisposed to this chemical taking over the brain. And just as we heard in Romans yesterday about why do I do the things I don't want to do, these guys tell me the same thing. You know, I have one drink just to be friendly, and the next thing I know, I'm laying down in the gutter somewhere. Or I smoke a little something, and next thing I know, it's all over and I'm face down. I have one guy tell me, you know, I really can't have sex with a woman anymore because whenever I had sex, I was on crack, and now it's just not the same. You see, the chemical rewires the brain, and the brain loses the ability to control what's going on. So I saw these guys through totally different eyes once I understood what was going on in their brains. Now, when we watch the movies, we find, like I said, the 12 steps and the spirituality and this thing. We talk about a lot of big questions. They ask me things about God and about the church and about why God abandoned them, and a lot about shame. They feel they have done so much, so wrong, that no one can forgive them. As a matter of fact, they can't even forgive themselves. And of course, that's all part of the process in the 12 steps, is you have to be able to forgive yourself before you can move on and ask forgiveness from others. And so we talk about prayer, and we talk about, I use the analogy of prayer as a muscle. And I tell them, you know, when you get out of here, you're going to have crisis, just like you had before when you came in. And if that muscle is weak, you're not going to have much strength. And when you keep calling on God at the last minute, you need to work that muscle. You need to have it strong, because you're going to need it when you get out of here. I tell them there's two things they got to have when they leave Bridge House: a relationship with God, and that 12th step, to continue that 12th step, because that 12th step keeps them connected to others. It's just as much for themselves as it is for those that they're helping. I've given this speech about 15 times since yesterday, on my way home, in the bed all night last night. Pages and pages of stuff I wanted to say. One thing that I found in my studies, I know many of you all have read Anthony DeMello. He wrote a great book called Awareness. And in his book, Awareness, he says that spiritual awareness is like nirvana, oneness with God. Well, I'm certainly not spiritually aware to that level, but I am aware of the needs of the people in our parish and our congregations and in Bridge House. And there is an overwhelming epidemic of people that are involved with addiction. And I think we need to heighten our awareness and sensitivity to it. Now, last week at Trinity, we had a group give a talk about youth addiction and youth abuse of drugs. The organization is called The Pact. They have some tools that they offer to parents and kids, and Father Scully spoke to some of that already. We have this brochure on the table. In this brochure, it says 47% of our youth today admit to substance abuse. This is pre-21. These are our teens and preteens. One of the statistics they gave us was that teens and preteens that frequently abuse substances are 65% more likely to be involved with addictions post-21 versus those that wait to 21 and then frequently abuse drugs and alcohol. 3% are likely to be involved in addiction in later life. These are some scary statistics. And as Father Scully pointed out, the peer pressure on our youth to be participatory in drugs and alcohol is beyond our comprehension. This program, they come to any school and any church and talk. This program gives parents and kids, preteens, the tools they need to avoid this peer pressure. They do a drug testing periodically as parents, and the kids sign a pact that say they're not going to use, and they can say when they go to parties or events where alcohol or drug is being abused, they can say, I can't participate because I don't know when the next drug test is coming. It's just a tool that helps out. It's a great program. I invite you all to stop by the tables and take a look at it, at some of the brochures. One other point I want to make is that I'm involved in the HIV ministry as well, and a large percentage of the people that are HIV positive are also involved in addiction. Addiction has often led to the risky behavior that caused them to be HIV positive. And this is something for life, just like addiction. An addict, alcoholic, is always in recovery for the rest of their lives. This isn't something that goes away. So there are 4 points that I think I'd like to leave you all with of something that you can do besides listen and feel compassion for these people. First, as Bishop Thompson suggested, we can open our facilities to groups like AA, NA, SA, ACOA, Al-Anon. This costs the churches very little. It connects us with the communities and the needs in our communities. And let me tell you something. At our last church, I started an AA group, and I can expect the same would happen if you started one at your church. None of your parishioners are going to go to your AA group. Anonymity is still crucial to recovery. But if the sister church in the next neighborhood has an AA group, they will visit that AA group. So you will be supporting that. Second, send a delegate from each parish to be part of the addiction recovery ministry. We only meet 4 times a year. It's not a huge commitment. We meet at different places in the state, so you don't always have to drive far. We have resources. You have parishioners that are going to call you about addiction. And you might not know who to call, but if you've got somebody in your parish that's on the ministry, they have the resources that they can connect you with. Third, offer an occasional 12-step Eucharist. Trinity used to offer it once a month. You don't have to invent this. We have it printed out. And you may have some better ideas, and that's okay too. But these are your people, and they have needs, and they need to be known that you care about that. And fourth, the last thing is that addiction needs to be addressed from the pulpit from time to time. Addiction like HIV has a huge stigma attached to it, and people are ashamed to admit it. It's in their family, or it's their spouse, or their friends. But they need to know that you care about it and that you are willing to address it. You know, we're always trying to find a way to correlate the Gospels or the readings each week to our congregations so that they understand that the people that lived 2,000 years ago and walked the streets with Christ aren't any different than we are today. In Mark, the demon-filled man that lived in the catacombs, in the tombs of Gethsemane, ripped the chains off, ripped his clothes off, lived like a madman out there. And Jesus came and exorcised him of the demons. This is the same demons we're dealing with here. These people have demons that need to be exorcised. And they need to know that the people that walked the earth 2,000 years ago had demons, and these demons are similar to our demons. In Mark 9, I think it is, they talk about the father whose son was possessed by a demon and kept throwing him on the ground and trying to kill him. These guys at Bridge House have tried to kill themselves, some of them. They have the same demons. They're dealing with this, and we need to be more compassionate about it. Now, one thing I want to say before I leave is I want to recognize Lance and Linda Armstrong for their service these many years of leading addiction recovery. They took this program on, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, and we were in the analog days where there was tons of papers, and they had to manage all that, and they managed to digitize this, and they have taken this ministry a long ways, and there's a huge amount of access. We have a website for addiction recovery now. There's a lot of resources that you can get on our website, or links to different websites. So I just want to take this minute to thank Lance and Linda for all the work they've done over the last 10 years. Please stop by our tables and pick up some brochures. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jay. For those of you I've not met before, my name is John Kellogg. I serve the diocese as the Canon Missioner for the diocese, and I'm also the priest in charge of St. Mark's and Harvey. I'm really proud to serve you in both of those roles. And I'm also the proud child of someone who struggled both with drug addiction and alcoholism. And I want to talk to you for just a few minutes this morning about how you yourself do not have to be an addict or an alcoholic in order for your world to be shaped by addiction. Like Scully, I was 14 years old the first time that I felt my world spin out of control. It was the day after Christmas. Something just felt off that morning. I remember hearing my mom crying from behind her bedroom door, so I walked in and I sat on the edge of my parents' bed. She put her hand on my knee. My father was standing right in front of me. "You need to tell him," she instructed my father, and so he did. He told me that for most of the past year, he'd been stealing narcotics from the hospital where he worked as a nurse and shooting up whenever he could find the chance. Sometimes at home, sometimes at work, sometimes while he waited to pick me up from soccer practice. And for whatever reason at that moment, I asked him to show me his arm, which he'd been covering up with long sleeves. I studied those track marks in the crook of his elbow for a few moments before closing my eyes and lying backwards. My world spun faster than it ever had before. We spent most of the next 3 days sitting together while my dad detoxed on the couch in our den. He was groaning and sweating. He was throwing up continuously. And looking back, I realized that he was fighting for his life in those moments, trying to reach up from the depths of hell. But not even 3 weeks would pass before he would relapse, this time headed for a residential drug treatment facility. That was the pattern in my family's life for the next decade. Months of sobriety and 12-step meetings and then a slip. A year working at a new job and then a relapse. My father's battle with addiction ultimately cost him his marriage, a stable roof over his head, tens of thousands of dollars of savings spent on drug treatment, at least 3 jobs. And on more than one occasion, it nearly cost him his life. The 5th time that he relapsed, he had been smoking crystal meth. He was tired. He was heartbroken. His voice was shaking when he finally choked out that he was holding a gun and that the only way he could imagine out of this was to say goodbye. I was in my car frantically driving around looking for him when he hung up the phone. My world spun again. But 90 seconds later, he called me back. And whatever happened in that minute and a half changed both of us forever, compelling both he and I to spend the rest of our lives telling this story to whoever needs to hear it. Because my father walked forward from that moment and spent the rest of his life helping scores of other people do the same. I learned at 14 years old that addiction is a disease. It's not just any disease, it's a family disease. It's a potentially fatal disease. You may not feel like you know a lot about addiction in this moment, though I hope that you know more than you did yesterday. But what I can assure you is that every single one of us in this room have been touched in some way by addiction. If you leave with nothing else this weekend, I hope you leave knowing a few more friendly faces that you can reach out to if you ever need to. Because this disease thrives on silence. It was years before I could speak openly about my experience with my father, which is one of the reasons I think it's so important to share the details of this story, no matter how nightmarish it may seem. If you are the family member or a friend of someone who's struggling with addiction, you are not alone in this. There are resources and communities available to you. I'm available to you, as well as anyone that's spoken this weekend. But I also want to emphasize that you don't have to be in recovery yourself in order to benefit from recovery spirituality or to reach out to someone who's affected by the disease. I am not an alcoholic or an addict, but the 12 steps have been life-saving for me, along with the support of so many others who've quietly walked this path. I'm the last one that's speaking to you all today about a story about addiction. And so I want to take a second to thank Bishop Thompson for allowing this convention to revolve around such an important issue. Yeah. Lance and Dee Dee, we're so grateful for y'all's leadership, and Bishop Taylor, as well as everyone else who's spoken this weekend. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I hope that you'll all take Bishop Thompson's charge to heart and go back to your churches this week and appoint someone to our Diocesan Addiction Recovery Commission. I want to remind you, you don't have to be in recovery, but you also don't have to break your anonymity to participate. You just have to want to be there. Their next meeting is going to be a week from today. That's November 12th, 10 o'clock in the morning at the cathedral. Even though the road to recovery can be long and painful and heart-wrenching, it can also be absolutely beautiful. The promise of our faith is that our darkest moment will never be our final moment. That's also the promise of recovery. If you or someone you love needs help, please find a way to try and get that help. That first conversation will not be easy. Your world will spin, and it may spin again and again and again, but it just may save your life. Thank you.